Wish everybody a good evening, and thank you for attending our Corporate Services Scrutiny Review Board. I think, do we have any apologies done?
We have apologies for Councillor Cooper and Councillor Pearce. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay, there's no late items to be introduced. Any declarations of interest? Non-recorded? I wasn't present for the previous meeting. I too got caught by this COVID stuff. I didn't, family members, so I was on isolation. And so can somebody move the minutes of the last meeting? Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Councillor Khan and Nawaz. Right, Linda, item 5, over to you, please. Digital transformation. Where are we?
Okay, I'll introduce myself. I'm Linda Innocent, Head of Information Transformation and Business Applications, and I'm representing Digital Services this evening. Digital Services last presented to the Scrutiny Committee approximately 18 months ago, and the world has obviously changed since this time. The presentation is split into 3 main areas: digital by default, citizen services, digital workforce, and digital connectivity. It reflects on what we have successfully delivered over the last 18 months and then looks at the plans for the future in these areas. So, okay, probably need to do another one. Okay. So on this slide, I just wanted to highlight a few points in each of the slides as we go through, rather than go through each point specifically. On this slide, we wanted to highlight the website Rebrand and Relaunch, which focuses on the usability by our citizens to get the information they need as quickly and easily as possible. We've implemented a new search engine and tools to make accessing the website more inclusive for our site visitors. We've also produced a number of online forms for use either internally or externally by our partners, particularly in social care in this instance. We've also supported services by developing new solutions and upgrading existing solutions that were out of support. So we've supported the upgrade of the committee management system, and also we'll see later the DALS system, which is used by adult learning for their students. Next one, please. During 2020 and 2021, we switched the programme to support, on the whole, the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This resulted in a number of new services being developed, some in short time frames to ensure our communities remain supported. Forms were developed for both internal and external use. There's a number of forms there that detail what we've actually produced. Next one, please. So moving on to digital workforce again. Sorry, Dom. Okay. So prior to the pandemic, we'd done a lot of work putting the foundations in place ready for the digital workforce. This allowed us, when the council was hit by, when the whole community was hit by the pandemic, to move quickly and decisively to respond to the changes that COVID presented to the ways of working of its staff. We were able to significantly accelerate the entire workforce's use of modern technology, digital working, prioritising the social care and key workers that, by rolling out across the estate, use of mobile and agile devices, the use of Skype and Teams, which is now embedded in the organisation and is used effectively by default now. We deployed devices to schools and disadvantaged learners. We significantly reduced the council's carbon footprint by supporting mobile working and home working, and we've also been able to support the democratic process through deployment of these technologies and others around the place. Next one, Dom. And again. Okay, moving on to digital connectivity. We continue to refresh and enhance the key components of the council's digital networks and the cyber defences that the council needs to keep in place. We've supported the expansion of the city fibre deployment across the city. Moving on to the next steps. So looking at digital enablement, so within the digital by default arena, we've looked at digital enablement of recovery, supporting the city recovery around the new portfolios, developing existing components around digital by default and citizen services, digital workforce and technology, embracing new components as appropriate to support this digital recovery. Next one. On this slide, we've shown we're supporting, we've maintained compliance, sustainability and security of the technology, whilst utilising the new options that present themselves. We're currently working on the Better Together partner integration to make use of the scarce resources within partners in the charity sector. We're working on SharePoint and internal automation to use the tools within the Microsoft suite to streamline the back office functions and deliver the services. We're working with City Fibre around the expansion across the city, and we're also working around with compliance, including cyber defences. Next one, please. So we're supporting the new normal council operations and emerging technologies, and I think there's a number of examples there where we are actually using those technologies or will be looking to use those technologies going forward. And again, and that's me. Sorry, that was a quick run through.
Right, thank you very much for that. That's a pretty good update from 18 months ago. Looks like we've come along quite a long way. Any questions from councillors? Councillor Khan.
You say citizen of problem, so where are you comparing the age groups? Obviously, this modern technology is well used by the younger generation. So 50 plus, 60 plus, would we have figures at how well that was used, or it's still new, or, you know, sometimes I'm just going through my experience that some of that age group find it very difficult or find it very stressing. Maybe they were used to something else before, and now something new coming out and
So we're effectively pushing digital by default, but we are supporting also digital, people supporting people to use digital, if you see what I mean. So there is, that's the part of the digital community, is effectively giving them the skills and knowledge to actually move into that space, so we don't have digital poverty. But it's also about giving them support networks so that family members or charities can support them in doing those activities that they might need to do as part of their daily lives.
that leads on to the next question. Okay, the charities and organizations who's going to support them, somehow are they going to be supported by the local authority?
I think that's one of the partnership workings, and it's about us actually using those resources as best we can. So we're looking at how we can do that in the best way.
Thank you.
Yeah, just on that one, I did ask that same question 18 months ago, and at that particular time I was told that we would get face-to-face support.
Yeah.
Any additional.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there, Joe. You know, I've tried to phone so many departments and I can't get through. At the end, I have to send them an email, can you ring me? Right? You know, for example, planning, I had a case where, and I needed to find out just more about the case, and I couldn't. It took 3 days to get through to somebody. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I had to send them an email to tell them to ring me.
I think that's probably a wider issue about people being accessible.
Yeah.
Chair, if I may, I'll very happily take that comment back to Andy Bramwell, who's in charge of customer services,
Right.
who primarily deal with the telephone responses. So I'm very happy to take that to a colleague, fellow director, and ask him what our response times are. I'm sure he'll have information on that. And I'm sure if councillors, I personally, if ever any councillor or colleague wants to get hold of me, they can just phone me or email me. I will always respond. I'll answer the phone if I can. That's my personal approach. Sorry, I'm Stephen Kaplan. I'm Director of Property Services. Sorry, Chair. So I'll very happily take that as an action personally back to Andy Bramwell, if I may.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Councillor Khan.
Just a comment. I think these digital services is for the future, and they should be there to be more efficient. Where I think you feel like all the council that they took in 3 days. It should do so. It should be more efficient, more on time, and should give a best service to the customer. That's how it should be better. And should be better than the previous services we've been offering. So that's how I see it. So I hope it works like that.
I mean, that is the intention. I mean, effectively, we should be getting to the point where we're not getting calls because we're not adding value. So, you know, the exceptions shouldn't be there, but obviously at this point they still are. So we need to address that.
Right, thank you. I've just got a couple myself. I think you answered my first one. I think you said we've got 88,000 My Accounts now. Was that right?
It's 118,000.
100. I was going to say.
Yeah, we increased them significantly as a result of the business rates grants being put through the My Account. So that was a up the number.
So once again, that raises the fact of older people as well that haven't got IT services. How are we going to serve them?
Okay, so we're still using the old processes, but we're also obviously trying to promote the new digital by default process. But we're not stopping the other processes. It's just that they are there in the background, but the preference for the council, from the efficiency perspective, is to actually use those processes going forward.
Okay.
So the phone lines should be open, but obviously it's proved concerning for councils.
Yeah, that was my second question on that. So just on the schools one, this one came in at full council as well. Have we got a figure on how many devices were actually delivered to schools, and was we on target to deliver them?
There is a figure, but I'm afraid I don't have it with me.
Okay, if you could just email that through, that would be
Yeah, okay.
handy. And how is home working getting on? Are people getting fed up now, or are we still in and out of the office? Is it working?
I think the technology is working, but I think the contact with individuals and the team building, the team working, the collaboration, some of that is now getting a bit thin, being remote. So I think we had a staff conference earlier today when Simon Riley spoke about this. And I think his view is that we need to revisit that and try and do a little bit of both, being in the office and also being remote, so that we can actually get address some of those issues, because some of it's a mental health issue, being remote, not seeing people from time to very much at all. So I think there's a whole piece of work that's going on, and it's been sort of rolled out across the organisation, that managers need to be starting to think about how do we get people together but safely. That's obviously got to be the priority.
Excellent. Yes.
Sorry, Chair, if I could possibly help on that point. I literally have got the numbers of the average occupancy of this building. And let us not forget, this is not the only council building. We operate many. We've got over 1,300 individual assets, but not all of those are operational buildings. And on average, unfortunately, I've closed my computer, of course, but I was looking at them this afternoon, and on average, this building is daily occupancy is running at about 365 people per day, whereas a year ago it was about 230, something like that. So it's increased by about 50%.
Good.
And as excuse me, as Linda's just rightly pointed out, Simon this afternoon has said on a colleague conference call about the use of council buildings, and we're moving into an era now of allowing a more mature decision process that allows for that collaborative working, that thinking, talking time, but on a basis whereby each team should carry out their own risk assessments, and they'll be signed off through Darren's team as well. We wish to make it absolutely clear that whilst the COVID restrictions nationally have been lifted, of course, our health and safety regulations remain in place, and we have a duty of care, and Darren will talk more about those. So I don't want to take away his leading stuff, but it's very important that we recognise we have a duty of care to our staff, to our visitors, and we're also moving into the autumnal period where flu and so forth might mask COVID. And so literally almost an hour ago on a call with Robin Dewars, Director of Public Health, and she agreed this would not be the right time to simply throw away those restrictions as we move into that winter period. So the message is we're going to keep much of the restrictions, the physical restrictions in place. We are absolutely allowing staff to come back into the building. We want them to come back in a measured way and not all together. So we want to build in resilience. So if you've got a team, we'd like you to split into 2, 3, 4, what is appropriate, so that we don't all suddenly become infected. We know that Birmingham City Council did have a council meeting that 100 councillors and officers were all in the same room, and there was an infection and they all got pinged and so forth. So we can't risk that for the council. So I don't know if that offers some help on coming back to council buildings.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I mean, I think the welfare of the staff and the public is very important, and taking a measured approach is the most sensible thing. Councillor Khan.
I just want to, COVID also, we've had a very difficult time, went through a very hard time. And also, it's taught us something also. The people working from home never happened before. People going on Skype never happened before. But I think some of the departments or some of the employees that can work from home, and I think the managers and the directors, they will know which one can work from home and expect very for money for the customer. So I think that can be looked into also. And I think that even some of the staff, if they can deliver better service from home, why not?
Also remember that there are staff who are unable to work from, we have staff, don't we? Healers, caretakers, refuse people who have never worked from home. How we contacted those during the, as you say, very difficult times.
Right, thank you. Just one final one. Obviously, with digital transformation, there's risks. Just like to raise the thing about cyber defence. That was on one of the issues, that more and more attacks are being carried out online and scams, and obviously we sort of, as councillors, go through our training. I'm sure the staff will do the same, and to do our bit. Are we on top of our game?
I think it's a never-ending fight. My colleague who sort of heads up this area, he is on top of his game. It's a perpetual, ongoing process, but we are keeping at it. It remains a risk. It will always remain a risk, because we don't know what the next attack's going to look like. Obviously, we're trying to keep the defences as strong as possible, but it's daily. Hourly.
No, I totally agree. I think it's a very difficult job as well at the same time. I mean, I think it's important that we have a robust system in place that actually looks at that, because I think you hear about all the other ones that are people that have been leaks and so on and everything, and it's quite damaging to any business, really. So, no, that's great. Thank you very much for that, Linda. That's very informative. Thank you. Right, I think, Darren, it's over to you, sir.
Chair, if I may just introduce it, perhaps, and then hand over to Darren, who will do the presentation. So, sorry, councillors, if I haven't introduced myself. My name is Stephen Kaplan. I'm the Director of Property Services. Darren is one of my service areas. I deal with obviously all the property across the council, the repairs and maintenance, the estate management, and Darren and his team also are in my area dealing with health and safety matters. It's important that we present to members this evening clearly that our role is protecting the council and the council's interface. This isn't about our street protection and people out engaging directly with the public on a day-to-day basis, although a lot of what you'll hear does involve that through care homes and children's and schools. It's important that we understand Darren's area's role, and it's about keeping the council and councillors safe, and I think we've maintained a very tight line on that, working with public health colleagues and so forth. So I don't really want to take any thunder away from Darren's hard work, and I'll hand over to Darren, if I may, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Steve.
Thank you. Just to say, I head up the corporate safety team, and we're, as Steve has said, we sit within the Property Services Directorate. So our focus is interpreting the law for the council and managing the council and its assets and so on in terms of health and safety. And just first of all, a thank you for inviting me to this committee. Unlike digital and transformation. I haven't been here before, so it's good to be here. If we start then with where we were in terms of 18, 19 months ago, and the journey we've been on all together, and so it continues. So on the slide you can see that we've been through 3 lockdowns, we went through 4 elements of tiers, and then this year we've been through 4 stages of a roadmap. And on the right-hand side of the slide are the dates that highlight those days, the national lockdown, when the Coronavirus Act, etc., was introduced. A couple of highlights on it for us. So we've got the first UK vaccination was administered on the 8th of December, and we remember seeing that on the television. And then we had our first vaccination here in Derby at the Arena, which was a great asset for the city, and the vaccination centre started to run from that day. Where we are now, clearly the government have issued autumn and winter plans A and B, and we're currently working on plan A. Depending on increase in infections and transmission, we may move to plan B, which brings back some of the previous guidance and legislation that has been removed in our personal lives, really. Next slide, please, Dom. So I think we start with our governance, really, and this slide really shows that at the heart of the response was the corporate safety team, that all these governing groups and working parties were set up to manage the council through the pandemic, and corporate health and safety was involved in all those groups. I won't go through them, or just pick out some highlights. So first of all, we started with our personal protective equipment. If you remember back in March 2020, the scramble to get PPE for people was tremendous, and the market seemed to be flooded with lots of fake PPE, or PPE that wasn't certificated to the standards that was needed. The council recognised this as an issue, and we put a working group together that involved corporate safety, trading standards and so on. So we were clear that the PPE we were buying and supplying was certificated, had been to the right testing houses, and that none of that then entered our workforce and market. We then worked alongside our colleagues, saying which PPE was required for which task and activity, and we drew up guidance that was shared to those colleagues. We looked at, you talked earlier, Chair, about working at home and home working equipment. So we soon established that to support people working at home, we issued some guidance about how to make some reasonable adjustments, raising your screen with using boxes and so on in the initial phase, putting cushions at a dining chair and so on. And then we moved into, as the pandemic prolonged, into supplying equipment for those, so keyboards, chairs we were able to take home from the council house, separate screens and so on. And then the third group that we now belong to, I'll pick out, is the enabling group. And this is the work that we're currently doing. So the work that Linda and Steve referred to earlier about how we're moving into the next phase, looking at it as a risk-assessed approach, bringing colleagues back to work, but not en masse, and still having those precautions in place. So what this slide really is saying is that the corporate health and safety function supports every other function across the council. So you can see schools were covered, social care and so on. Next slide, Tom. Based upon on that, clearly one of my team's roles is about looking at the guidance and how we interpret that for the council and its services, its staff, and how that has the wider impact upon the city. So we had national guidance from government, we had specific industry guidance, so care guidance or refuse. I think their national industry is called the WISH guidance, who published some guidance. And then we had local guidance wherever we moved into a tier. So the Director of Public Health could direct Derby itself to have some strategies. What we did get there was constant updates. So you'd be working on a guideline in the morning, reviewing that, and it would be updated by lunch, and we'd have to start changing that. You'd sometimes have conflict or contradiction amongst the guidance. So as an example of that was the refuse workers' guidance said that they should wear latex disposable gloves under their work gloves to stop COVID going through. And we said, well, COVID doesn't go into the skin. What you need to do is avoid touching your face, and therefore it's about hand washing and so on, not the need to have a glove. And if people are being supplied with latex gloves, are we then, this was early on in the pandemic, not having stocks for care settings where they really belong when you're delivering personal care, etc. If you remember as well on TV, there was lots of things about taking temperatures with scanners that were held to people's foreheads, and also on the market became what we call fogging machines, a machine that could clean an area, and people were saying, can we have those? And we felt like we were the doom and gloom up saying, no, we don't believe you should be using a fogging machine in these particular situations, because before you use it, you should have to manually clean the area. So why manually clean it, then fog it when you've done the cleaning? And the scanner, for example, takes your skin temperature, not your core body temperature, and it's the core body temperature that was... So we're a bit like, bad cop here, saying not, you can't have these things. But down the line, the Medicines Health and Regulatory Authority, 3 months after we'd said no, made a decision that those scanners shouldn't be used. So it supported what we'd done 3 months before. So as we said, the guidance was constantly changing, sometimes contradicting each other, and that was one of our clear things to work with and get that out to teams. Next slide, please, Dom. So on the left, we've got some of the highlights, really, the work that the team have done to date, and I'll just pick out, again, a few from that list. On the right-hand side, we've got some of the impacts, really. So the first thing is, and Steve and Linda mentioned it earlier, is that we required people to complete what we called a COVID-secure risk assessment. So we have 166 of those that have come through my team that are published on iDerby for all the different services. And risk assessments clearly aren't a once thing, so they're being updated and reviewed constantly. So the work of the enabling group and the move to this blended working approach requires those risk assessments to be completed. We provided schools in Derby with a template risk assessment, not just the schools that are maintained schools, but we felt we needed to support the wider school community in Derby. So our template was shared with all schools in Derby to use, and we were a team that they could phone for advice and guidance, whether they were a maintained school or external to the City Council. We had some outbreaks, clearly amongst the staff, and they were required to be reported to the Health and Safety Executive. The Health and Safety Executive contacted me directly for a response and some questions. We responded, and the HSE came back saying, great, the work you've done, the measures you've put in place, they were confident in what we'd put in place. So, yeah, we reported outbreaks, but we were confident in the measures we'd take. And one of the questions they asked was, are you sure staff are getting the right PPE? And we could, because we'd set up the PPE group with trading standards and so on. So we were confident that we hadn't got those fake pieces of PPE out in our workforce. So what were the impacts? Well, one of the impacts was that because services had stopped to operate or people were working at home, other health and safety issues that generally happen disappeared. So we weren't getting incidents of abuse, aggression and violence from customers who were frustrated or coming into the council house. Our accident rate reduced across the council because we weren't having the manual handling injuries or other sorts of things because services were either not operating in lockdowns or were working from home. But one of the key things is the engagement amongst the managers and the workforce in terms of health and safety. And having to do those risk assessments and so on, it's been perhaps one of the silver linings from the COVID pandemic, that that engagement with health and safety has come about because of that. Next slide, please, Dom. So our current position, as we've said earlier, we continue to operate in a safe way in line with current health and safety regulations, as now much of the COVID legislation has been removed in terms of what we can do in our private life, and work-related safety now sits back under the Health and Safety at Work Act and other associated legislation. The bottom of the slide just highlights some of the things we've done. So I'd already mentioned the 166 service risk assessments. Clearly, there we've got 45 courses for social care. So we have staff, as I said earlier, who couldn't work from home. We had to deliver frontline care services, and we were recruiting care staff to support our Home First and our children's services. They're required to go through mandatory training. So we deliver part of that mandatory training to those teams. So we've delivered 45 frontline courses to social care. You mentioned working at home. We've had 1,512 working at home risk assessments returned from the colleagues. And as we've said, non-COVID accidents and incidents have reduced, but we have had these 32 RID or reportable accidents, incidents of COVID that have, as you say, the HSE have inquired about, and we've successfully dealt with that. So moving on, Dom, some of the things that we've done then that have made a difference not only for the council but for the city. We've been involved heavily in working with our opening the city centre. So one of the key things we were involved in was the health and safety risk assessment for the Marketplace Plaza, so the citizens of Derby could access some social, entertainment. We were involved heavily supporting our elections team with the recent May elections so that they were run in a COVID-secure way. So we supported and did the risk assessment for the polling stations, and many of you will have been at the count and saw how we put the COVID-secure measures in at the count. Next slide, please, Dom. So, are there still concerns? Well, clearly, COVID hasn't gone away and infections are increasing. But on the other hand, we've been in this position now, haven't we, for 17 months, 18 months, 19 months, and people are becoming fatigued. I've had my jabs, I'm not, you know, so we need to manage COVID fatigue, really. While our eyes have been on COVID, are there other health and safety risks that we need to refocus back on as a team and look at those? Further outbreaks could happen. We could move to Plan B and we'll reintroduce some measures, you know, face coverings and so on. Hence why we're keeping the social distancing, the one-way routes and so on within our council buildings. So on the right is the action that we're taking to mitigate that. So we're looking at ongoing communication with our staff. A good example today was Simon's presentation at the staff conference. We're undertaking compliance audits about how people are managing COVID within their services. So the risk assessments look great on paper. Are you following them in practice? We're part of the enabling group that's supporting our move to this blended approach to work, bringing services back to the council house. We've purchased some software jointly with Derby Homes that will enable more efficient accident recording and audit checking and so on for so a health and safety management system. And we're planning our return to our business as usual, so delivering other face-to-face training. We're looking at undertaking service assessments around work-related stress and lone working. So back to some of those other health and safety risks. Dom, next slide, please. So future challenges. We need to treat COVID as any other health and safety risk, so manual handling, Legionella, fire and so on. It now sits under health and safety legislation, so we need to mitigate against occupational exposure. I've talked about the work of the enabling group and the way we're looking at the blended approach. We need to still focus and report any incidents and outbreaks and manage those in a timely way. Review the risk assessments in light of changes and increasing COVID numbers and any changes to guidance, and focus on our business as usual. So we're mindful that infection rates are rising and they're too high within the city. We have this duty of care under our health and safety legislation, both to our colleagues and to those people who access our services. And as Steve mentioned earlier, we're aware of other councils, the incident in the West Midlands, where there was a full council, somebody was positive, and everyone pinged. That could put officers and the councillors out, out for the 10 days. So those are the things that we're still mindful of. So thank you. Hopefully that's given you a bit of a flavour of the work that my team, we've been a little busy over the last 18 and so months. So any questions?
Sorry, Chair, if you don't mind, if I just pick out a couple of key highlights there that I think Darren has very much covered, but I think there is a lot of information there. So working from home, we've talked about a lot, and what we did there, not only to enable all our colleagues to do that, we've put lots of training online. So our My Derby has got lots of guides, e-learning, the risk assessments are all there to support our colleagues, including display screen assessments, right kind of posture for your chairs. We've allowed staff to have physical equipment as well. So health and safety have been very much at that. And that's also worked very closely with the presentation we just heard from Linda about digital. There was a massive digital rollout just at the same time as we were moving up to Windows 365. So that rollout was happening exactly the same time, which actually helped us because we were doing it anyway. So Andy Bramwell's team really did enable people to work from home if they needed to. And it's worth remembering no staff were furloughed. some authorities did find a way, but local authorities weren't supposed to furlough. We didn't furlough anyone, to my knowledge. You mentioned the elections, which I was going to mention as well, because that was a massive, massive task. Every single polling station needed to be COVID secure. It needed to have those risk assessments for the public, and the arena we didn't want to take back because of it was being used as a vaccination centre, and I negotiated that deal, and we could have taken it back, but we think the health of the nation and the residents was more important. So in fact, I secured the football in Power League. So I literally contacted the chief exec to agree that, and they gave us that free, which is worth mentioning that throughout this, a lot of these measures, these COVID measures, have cost a lot of money. All our sanitisation, all of these has been picked up by central government. So the council has not basically been financially challenged up to now on all these costs. And the final point is, as well as all those risk assessments, we also looked very specifically at target and vulnerable groups, whether they were had assisted requirements, but also the BAME community were, if you recall, seen to be an area of society that was unduly hit by the COVID, and therefore we had a dedicated BAME risk assessment done for colleagues, and we were very important that those were rolled out. I mean, if you know the Connect Derby team, which is our business centres, which also come with it, almost every single person, every single colleague there carried out a BAME risk assessment, and we were able to support and protect them. So I don't know if that highlights some of the excellent work Darren's done, and I'm sure he'll be happy to take questions.
I think first things first, I think please go back to your department and thank them from all of us, for the hard work they've done. I certainly know people have been shifting about, and, councils also have been going out during lockdown and serving their residents well. So please, from all of us, say a big thank you to them. We don't always get a little pat on the back that we deserve at times. And, with the teams shifting over everywhere, we'll get through this, but thank you. Thank you, Stephen. And Darren. Any questions? Councillor Khan, you had your hand up.
Thank you for the presentation. I think, okay, this was something very new, not from Derby, everywhere in the world. So now, the winter period, if it does, it doesn't. Now the figures are going up. Are we well equipped, and are we now well using that digital message goes across to society, that we don't want to relax on this, so we need to make sure that health and safety and all that, and that stays behind our mind, because it can be easily forgotten, because it's about few people, one person went around and spread it to all of the city. That's how bad this COVID is. So I think we, as a council, putting a message across to our citizens, and keep this in their mind, social distancing, hand, face, eyes, that message, you stay there until we get rid of this COVID issue. We don't know how long it's going to take, but I think that responsibility has to go, a very strong message, maybe public health, your department, that the citizen of Derby should always keep that behind in their mind.
I think just to add on to that, I would say, what are we doing?
The slide that had all those different groups,
Yeah.
they continue, and each week we review figures, we review strategies, and Robin, the Director of Public Health, Dr. Robin Dewis, is chair of those. So this afternoon only we had one of those meetings, which is with the wider city council, city organisations, so on it, to the university, the colleges, the police, NHS and so on. And comms sit on that, our own comms team. And every time there's clear messages going out. So Robin, I think, goes on Radio Derby, getting that message out. We're sending messages through our comms team about exactly the things you've said, Councillor, in terms of making sure people, it's not gone away. We've not become COVID complacent. Still follow the messages of hands, face, space. Remember social distance. So this personal responsibility to the citizens of Derby. There are specific messages going to schools because there's transmission rates within schools. So we're still there, we're still planning, we keep the messages going, and nothing in terms of that has relaxed or changed. Hence, the message here at the council that we're maintaining social distancing, we're managing our occupational exposure through health and safety rather than the COVID regulations that have been relaxed.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Darren. And if I can also add that we've still maintained the PPE stocks. We've got, I think, 60,000 items ready and available. We've got stocks of sanitizer. So we are ready to remobilise if we needed to. And as you rightly said, the message is still, we're keeping these measures in place. We're keeping that messaging in place. We are ready to redeploy staff if needed into various teams, such as the PPE team. You know, their work has generally stood down for the moment, but the stocks are still there, and we are ready to remobilise if we had to very quickly. But it's really important that message is still maintained, and we are doing that.
Councillor Con? Yeah.
Question. The other one, you touched on various conditions. Yeah? So I think some of that part of the city, I think, okay, early stages, they can accept it. Now, when that part of the city was hit really hard, so now the message has gone across, but I don't want them to relax. The message out there should be there, and you also mentioned in your slide the enforcement. You know, some of the businesses and all that, I think we need to be staying on top of enforcement that it's not, we don't want to relax if you don't follow the guidelines. Yeah, there will be maybe fines or something.
So in terms of my team's role, we're really like the gatekeepers for the council services. Our colleagues in environmental health are the enforcers for businesses and so on, or the HSE would be, depending on the level of business within the city. But we do know that we have in our own libraries, for example, the HSE phoned a couple of weeks ago to a library and said, could you just take me through your COVID secure measures still? So they answered and they said, great. So we know that those spot checks are happening.
This is coming like an health and safety officer now. You know, in any organization,
Yeah.
any department, a COVID officer. Because obviously somebody has to pass that message on to their organisation or their group of staff, or maybe a store, or maybe an organisation or somebody. It's like a health and safety officer.
I think Councillor Khan actually raises a very good point there. I mean, I've had a lot of complaints from distribution centres, people that have been working out there, and quite clearly the sort of guidance has not been followed, and to a point where they've been really concerned about the measures that have been going on, and you know, obviously we've flagged it up, and I think in some fields they say they can't. And then you've got other businesses that are operating, want to treat it as a herd community and get it out of the way. I've had people reports of businesses private like that the employers are not sort of working to program. I mean, surely the sort of environmental people, it's up to the private businesses to sort their own house out. We don't have the power over what they can do, or do we?
It depends on the business and the legislation. So under the Coronavirus Act, they did. Now it's moved back under health and safety legislation. So our colleagues in our environmental health team who inspect certain premises, so they don't go in the mall because that would sit with the HSE. So those two people would go in and check that, as I said earlier, COVID is now treated as any other, health and safety hazard. So where they'd be checking them for how they manage manual handling in a distribution centre and a warehouse, they should also be inspecting them how they manage COVID under health. So how are you protecting workers from occupational exposure and transmission? And so colleagues in environmental health will be doing that for low-level, the businesses that they inspect within the city, and the HSE for larger organisations or the council, hence those calls we've had to our libraries and our visits to our checking out what measures we'd put in place and were they working. And the answer came back from the HSE, we were compliant.
Okay,
My
cool.
team's role is making sure we've got that in place. And so private businesses should employ some health and safety expertise or access health and safety expertise to support them with those challenges.
Yeah. Well, now that the concerts and football matches and everything are going ahead,
Yeah.
It's quite visible that some of the measures aren't being taken
And
into account.
again, there's this dichotomy, isn't there, between work and occupational exposure and the legislation, and then what you can do in your private life.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the message I think you were saying, still push that message about...
Yes, it's important. Yeah.
The environmental health, are they going to continue? So obviously, you're working in partnership with them, but obviously you can't go out there, your organization, out there to monitor or randomly go and pay a visit to a certain part of the city just to keep them alert while the COVID, because the figures going up, maybe you get from one part of the city where environmental health might need to go in some part of the area there just to see that people are following the guidelines. So how will that work?
So how that works currently is that this weekly incident management team meeting we have, environmental health colleagues attend that meeting and update the group on any enforcement, any visits, because as we have to report in outbreaks, so do the private businesses, and that would then trigger a visit or support to that business from colleagues in environmental health. But the head of service we could, get to answer, but they are proactive in their support, so giving out guidance and so on, and do some of those visits.
My question is, so if a person got COVID, they go to hospital, A&E, they get admitted, so that person would obviously briefly say where the person was, where it
Yeah.
yeah, and then would it come back to the system
Yes,
here, public
yes.
health, and then we would know which part of
Yeah.
the city it started.
So the test and trace teams inform the city council's test and trace of where they work or that contact was and so on, and then that's followed up by those various people, whether it be a school or a local business or a gym or whatever, and then that's where the environmental health officers follow that up.
Thank you.
Good job took a jacket. Councillor Pandey, do you want to add any comments?
Yeah, thanks to all who were involved. Really appreciate the hard work, and you got it for free. Many people don't know about this, but
We looked at a number of venues. David Lloyd and the Power League. David Lloyd were less than engaging, but Power League were very, very helpful. And remember, they'd just been allowed to reopen at that point. Literally, they were allowed to reopen. But I personally engaged with the chief exec, Christian can't remember his surname, I've got it on my phone, and he was very helpful to the council and allowed us use of it. I guess there wasn't any heating because obviously you're running around kicking a football, so you don't need
Yeah.
heating, and that was possibly something we didn't fully envisage. Also keeping the big doors open at one end. If we were able to go back, I think that would be a lesson we learned. Hopefully we'll be back at the arena, and of course the injections haven't stopped, they've just
No.
moved,
Yep.
so we do have use of the arena back should we need it.
Willis was willing to give it. Willis wasn't. Just there. But I had a word with the next time, sorry. He said we've already agreed it. Yeah. They were willing to give it.
But I remember we worked on my sliding officer to really a few of the cars with the boxes being delivered, the screens all being cleaned and then taken in. One of my team was in the arena checking the COVID secure measures, but as you see, you ran two, didn't you? Because you had the council action, the police and fire commission, and so we had no outbreak or reports.
There wasn't that many people in there. There's nobody's back to what this time of it. Was any candidate?
Okay, thank you. Just one last one from me, and then we can wrap up. Darren, you said that you've had 34 riddle reports, COVID-related. Have you got a breakdown of COVID-related?
So we had some, so the HSE changed the riddle regulations during the pandemic and said that where exposure was likely to have occurred at workplace, those reports were required. So we had some outbreaks in care settings and one within our Street Pride service, but those were managed. The controls were put in place. We held, we call them OCT meetings, so that's outbreak control teams, and manage those in a success. And again, you learn and you review, and this was early on in the pandemic when the controls weren't, the guidance and stuff still hadn't been published, and it was things like people were travelling to work, car sharing, were wearing full PPE, doing their activity, then going for a break or a smoke, and within distance. So all those were then re-added to the risk assessment about how we manage those.
That's well answered, Darren, because I know exactly where you're coming from.
Thank
Right.
you.
Okay. Any more questions, councillors? No? Thank you very much for that. Yeah, if you wish to go, you can go. Thank you very much for your time. And please do thank your teams. I know how much hard work they put into it, and it's not always. You're welcome.
Sorry, we've just got item 7 still.
We've just got one more
Councillors.
item left to do. We've got one more.
Just the
Work programme.
Yeah, the work programme.
Right, okay. I did, although I wasn't present, I did watch the meeting on YouTube. That's the way we do things now, right? So one of the things, we didn't have a review last year because we were right in the thick of COVID and so on. And obviously, like I mentioned, officers were moving about so irregular. I don't think it was appropriate to sort of tie them down any more than we needed to. So that was the reason why we didn't have one last year. I've highlighted a topic review for this time. I think we need to move on. I've got my sheet here. Can you remember which one I highlighted, Dominic?
I think you were looking at something in procurement.
Procurement.
I'm not sure.
Look at the way we're dealing with procurement, and especially during the COVID period. I think that would cover where the orders are going, how much it's costing and things like that. So I think we need to have a breakdown of, spending, and if it's spent wisely, and we'd take it for that. If that's okay with you? Yeah? So, and another thing we've got on our papers, you've got a list of, on page 2, a list of, this commission is the largest commission with the most items on the agenda. 4.2, yeah. Right, it covers all those. So anything that you want to put onto the work programme, let Dominic know, and of interest, and then what we'll do is we'll have a look at the timetable. I think we're quite full already, isn't it?
We've got the joint meeting
Yeah.
in March, but we can always put extra stuff into that.
Yeah. So have a look if you've got any burning issues that you want to sort of, scrutinise that particular one, and bring it to Dominic and copy me into it, and then, we can have a look where that can sit. So it's on 4.2. If you have a look at papers when you get back, it's quite a large list. So, but other than that, thank you very much for attending. And
The next one, working smarter than financial management.
yeah,
Sam Riley.
sorry.
Is that on December the 9th? The working smarter.
Yeah, Simon Riley. Yeah. Yeah, Simon's covering that, and then we have got on that 9th also the procurement update. Emily's been and she's presenting that, but I think we should be sort of digging into that a bit more. Okay, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the evening.